Hello, pranksters, and welcome back to another deck review today, the place you go to find a new deck to play or to find out if that one guy at Locals is actually playing a viable strategy. So today, we're going to be covering Altergeist on this deck review, but before we get into that, be sure to check out all those links down below to not only my new podcast, which you can find on Anchor and listen to on places like Spotify and Apple Podcast, wherever you want to, and as well as other channels I'm involved in, like the Coalition of Scrubs and Team Chaos Stream. If you guys haven't heard of the Coalition of Scrubs yet, basically it's another Yu-Gi-Oh channel I'm a part of, where me and several other Yu-Gi tubers get together and make you guys some awesome Yu-Gi-Oh content. So be sure to go check that out. I will also have each of the individual creators linked down in the description as well for you guys to go check out. Go show them all some love. They are all awesome individuals creating you guys some awesome content. So once again, be sure to go give them some love. And while you're down there, you might as well show me some love too and click that like and subscribe button so you guys can get future videos like this, as well as some meta-analysis, deck profiles, and just other sorts of awesome Yu-Gi-Oh content. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the Altergeist deck reviews. So I'm actually going to start off, I'm going to add the summary of the deck to these videos. If you guys are watching my deck reviews before, I usually just kind of jump straight to the pros and cons of the deck, but I realize that maybe not everyone is fully aware of the strategies and what they're intending to do. So Altergeist is a control style deck aimed at gaining advantage through like a war of attrition, based around trap cards to gain advantage, while their monsters can swing at their opponent, deal some damage, and just kind of win over time while keeping the board and the advantage in their favor. So uses cards like Evenly Matched and Pot of Extravagance to keep their resources higher up, and has on-field and in-hand disruption to be able to stop their opponent from making the plays that they want to and stop them from comboing off. Basically, they just try to keep the board in control and keep what they want on the field and keep what their opponents want on the field off of it. So what it lacks in damage, it definitely makes up for in keeping the opposing board clear. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump straight into the pros and cons of this deck today. So starting off, like I said, this is a control style deck. It's very popular in this format right now. You're seeing a lot of control decks going around, like Eldritch. Subterra is also pretty popular right now. Numeron going into the S0. Utopic Zexal is kind of a control in and of itself. It's more so of an engine. Dogmatica is huge right now. Control is just a very popular type of deck in the format right now, and it's kind of cool to see it, but this deck can compete against top tier strategies, making it definitely a very big part of the pros of this. And of course, it just got Multifaker back to 3 on the last ban list, seeing as we still haven't gotten our September ban list. Come on, Konami, what are you doing? You are slacking right now. It's a fairly consistent deck, moderately budget now with reprints. Recently we just got Extra printed for like the 3rd time, I think. Impermanence is getting cheaper thanks to Dual Overload. Evenly Matched still needs more reprints, but that's only stayed at like the $20 range, so it can be fairly pricey compared to most other decks, but at the same time, compared to like the top decks, it's still fairly budget, so I'm kind of giving it props for that. And it also allows for a slower playstyle, maybe for someone who's new or returning to the game and has been gone for a while. This is definitely a big benefit for you. Makes it a lot easier to be able to navigate your way around the game, figure out what the decks are and how they play, and just kind of learn the format in general and have a chance at being able to go against them. And this deck technically can go first or go second thanks to Evenly Matched. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the cons and the downsides of this deck. So like I mentioned, it can get pricey with those cards like Extravagance, Impermanence, Evenly Matched. There's a couple of extra deck cards that'll get a little bit pricey, and other main deck cards if you choose to use them, like Forbidden Droplets or Triple Tactics Talents. Any of those cards will definitely get a bit pricier. This deck can definitely add up depending on how you play it and what kind of build you're running, or you can definitely go for the budget variant, which is why the budget of this deck makes it on both sides of the argument. It does take a lot of knowledge of the format to be able to play this deck, because you have to know when to counter cards to be able to stop the opposing strategies and be able to gain the advantage that you intend to. You basically need to know how to maneuver around things and know when's the best time to use something, rather than just kind of vomiting out a bunch of monsters and trying to push for game. It's just that type of play style. It takes that more methodical thinking, and it's more like playing a really complicated game of chess with a lot of reading. And people are also prepared for this deck right now, given the decks like Eldritch. There's just a whole bunch of back row hate going on right now. Lightning Storm is huge, Evenly Matched is huge. Anti-Magic Arrows got popular for a little while when Eldritch first got released. It's kind of died down a little bit now. But there is plenty of back row hate going on right now. Cosmic Cyclone's another huge one. People playing the Nightmare Phoenix in their extra deck. There are so many decks playing back row hate, and it really hurts this deck a little bit. And it's also not a blowout deck. It really loves to grind. You're not just gonna like expect to just break a board in one turn and be able to do whatever you want. Maybe if you can get the evenly matched and actually be able to get it off, you could definitely equalize board states, but you're never really gonna like break a board, you know? There's always gonna be something that you gotta go through that might take a few turns to take out, and that's why it's usually better as a going first build, because you can kind of pick apart the board before it really gets the chance to build itself, and it's really fun in that regard, being able to do that, to be able to watch your opponent's whole strategy crumble as you throw out like 3 negates. So that is the pros and cons of this deck. It's kind of like a rough overview of what I'm actually about to get into with the numerical values and the actual ratings of this deck. So let's go ahead and jump into that. As always, we will start off with the consistency of this deck. I am going to give this a solid 8.5 out of 10 because there's actually several reasons for this. Multifaker, like I mentioned, came back to 3 on the last list, and this is like the main card for most of the Altergeist plays. It allows you to, when you activate a trap card, special summon itself and special summon another Altergeist monster from deck. So you're getting 2 bodies on field, potentially some extra disruptions, makes some more of your back row live. It definitely makes this deck a lot easier to play. And the plays in this deck aren't really too crazy. Like, you're not looking to combo off and do anything too insane, so it makes it a lot easier for the deck to be consistent, because it doesn't need to draw like key combo pieces to make things work. You could really play with literally any hand as long as you get something that will disrupt your opponent and achieve the goal that your deck is meant to do. So it's really kind of hard to break with this deck because it is a control style. Your whole strategy is literally just turboing around controlling your opponent and stopping them from playing. So it really doesn't matter too much if you draw like the right cards in your hand. As long as you draw good enough cards, you'll be fine. And you can also search out traps in this deck thanks to Altergeist, Marionette, and there are also other ways to get to some of these trap cards. So the consistency really is not all that bad in this deck. And of course, Pot of Extravagance getting you the free draw too, because this deck doesn't really use its extra deck all that much. It can surprise with a lot of damage from some of the Altergeist Link monsters, but that's not the primary focus of this deck, so the Extravagance, getting that couple extra draws, is definitely huge for the strategy. It really needs it. And like I said, it's just easy enough to play with this deck in general that consistency isn't really a huge factor when it comes to this deck, because just about any hand it gets, it can play with. So that's it for the consistency. Let's talk about the resistance of this deck, which I am also going to give a solid 8.5 out of 10. It's not as affected by common disruptions of the format like Ghost Ogre, Ash Blossom, Imperm. It's not as affected by those as most other decks, because once again, this deck is mostly relying on the back row and also hand traps. The monsters are just there to be able to do damage to actually eventually close out the game. That's not the main focus of the strategy at all. Of course, they do have benefits like Silquidus being able to bounce cards back to the hand, or Marionette being able to search your traps. So there are definitely things in this deck that can be hurt by hand traps, but it's not going to be affected nearly as badly as, say, a combo deck like Adamancipator, you know? I mean, imperming a Marionette is not the same thing as imperming a Halqifibrax. It's just not the same thing. So in terms of advantage, this deck doesn't really get hurt by most hand traps or disruptions at all. Like, there's obviously a few cases, but for the most part, it's really not that bad. And of course, general back row hate does really affect this deck, but it's not always going to be enough to be able to take this deck out of the game unless they just get like a full back row wipe, in which case they're probably going to be hurting a little bit. So there is that. Alright, with that being said, let's go ahead and check out the power of this deck. This one is only getting a 5 out of 10 from me because this deck never was intended to bring damage. Of course, like I said, the extra deck monsters can surprise with a fair amount of damage out of nowhere, and of course you can always get the Nibiru if you end up proccing that off from your opponent. But for the most part, this deck is not intended to output damage. It's really here, once again, to keep the opponent's board clear, paying in for a few points every turn, and just kind of keep the game rolling in their favor. So there's not a whole lot to be said when it comes to power, because I think your maximum attack for one of your main deck Altergeist monsters is 1600. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not looking at any of the cards right now, so I could very well be wrong about that. So guys, let me know down in the comments if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure Marionette has the highest attack points at 1600. So there's really just not a whole lot of power that this deck can output. It's got a maximum ceiling, and it doesn't really go very high in terms of power. So that out of the way, we'll go ahead and talk about Disruption now. This one has to be a 9.5 out of 10, because that's literally all this deck is intended for, is just pumping out disruption after disruption after disruption. Once again, you get things like Silquidus that allow you to bounce cards back to hand. You get any of your Altergeist traps that will allow you to special summon your Multifaker to get into other monsters. Your Conqueri, which from hand can special summon himself when your opponent's monster declares an attack to negate the attack, and then when he hits the field, he can negate a monster's effects on field. So actually a really good card there. It comes up a lot more than people think. And of course, Altergeist Protocol contribute Altergeist monsters to be able to negate effects, and then you have other Altergeist cards that just pop off and let you do all sorts of different things. So, and of course, you can play generic stuff, generic back row like Solemn Judgment, Cosmic Cyclone. You could probably get away with playing Mystic Mine if you wanted to. I don't think it's really going to be the best way to go with this deck. And since the Altergeist monsters are spellcasters, you could definitely run Secret Village of the spellcasters so that your opponent can't play spell cards, at least while you control one of your monsters on field, which isn't always going to happen. But it definitely is a possibility. And of course, there's just other things in this deck that just put out all sorts of different disruption, or at least get you into things that will let you output disruption. It's just an incredible deck all around, and I think it's a really fun one to play. Once again, if you're more so new to the game or just returning and you just need something to be able to kind of learn the format a little bit and be able to figure out what's kind of going on. So continuing on now, we'll go ahead and move on to the flexibility of this deck, which is also sitting at an 8.5 out of 10. I'm giving a lot of stats to this deck at 8.5 out of 10, which does make sense because this deck is just good. It's just good at what it does. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I think it's easily a tier 2 deck, but we'll get more into that when we get to the final section of this video. So the flexibility of this deck, the playstyle is meant to change depending on the opponent's build, especially in a match rather than a single game. So it's meant to be adaptable and flexible, because it revolves around reacting to what the opponent does and being able to slow them down while giving themselves the advantage. So it's more of a responsive deck than a proactive deck, which is normal for a control style build. That's really what control decks are aiming at, is just being able to keep the board in their favor, leaving the things they want on there and taking off the things they don't want, and just basically saying no. Like, that is the definition of Altergeist, is just no. So there's not really much else that needs to be said about flexibility. It's pretty self-explanatory once again, because it's technically a counter deck in quotation marks, just because you can't really just call it like counter, but it's, regardless, it's just insane at outputting a lot of disruptions. So now into the second last section of this deck review, we are going to talk about budget, which is a 6.5 out of 10. Like I mentioned in the pros and cons, it really can go either way depending on how you build the deck. You can definitely do it more so for budget, or you can orient it more towards that expensive competitive end. Your playstyle isn't going to be affected too terribly much. There's just, once again, those really good cards that do cost a few extra bucks, like the Evenly Matched, the Imperms, and the Extravs, that will definitely up the power and the ceiling of this deck. But at the same time, they're not always necessary. You can definitely get by with just a cheaper build. I don't think it's really anything too much to be worried about. If you're just running your cheap hand traps like Effect Failures and all that stuff, you'll probably be fine. As long as you're able to output the same amount of disruption, in most cases, you'll theoretically be okay. It's, like I said, it's just possible to play a more budget version of this deck. It's not the most expensive deck that you can play out there, but it's also not the cheapest. Thankfully, it's just not like Eldritch level of expensive, where it's $140 per copy of your only main deck monster. That deck just kills me every time I think about it. So that's it for the actual like individual sections. Let's go ahead and take a look at the overall rating of this deck. So when you add all of the numbers up together and divide it by 6, because there are 6 different sections, I know how to do math, that equals a 7.75 out of 10. So this deck, once again, easily fits into that tier 2 category. It can keep up with the meta fairly well. It's consistent, it's disruptive, not extremely powerful. You can definitely throw in cards to kind of fix that a little bit. Stuff like the Selene combo I've found is pretty good, that you can like Selene up into your access code talker, but once again, that's going to be some more money, especially if you're playing extra, because you're probably going to want more than one access code at that point. So it really just depends on how you run the deck and your in general play style, but overall, like, just Geist as a generic archetype is good at just pumping out advantage and being able to keep ahead and play that really, really long grind match. So if this is your guys' kind of playstyle, I definitely recommend taking a look into it. Find yourself a few deck profiles online, see what kind of decks work best with you, and go from there. Because once again, I am not a perfect person. I will reiterate this every time. This review is reflective of how I view the deck, so you guys might see it differently. Definitely be sure to go check out some other perspectives on the deck. Definitely check out some deck profiles and just get other people's thoughts on the deck, because it is a good one. I can't say for sure how well it is for you in terms of your playstyle and if it's the deck that you need to play, but it is definitely a good option. So that's all I got for today, guys. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and don't forget to check out all the links below. I hope to see you guys next video. Remember to have fun and make your move. Peace out.
I'm a love giver.